Freya Spanky Taylor interviews her grandmother, Allegra, about family memories.
Did a lot of our family live in Poland?
Well, certainly my father's family all lived in Poland, so that's a quarter of your family. And he was the only child of quite elderly parents, and they lived a very peaceful middle-class life in a small village called Tomaszów Mazowiecki in the centre of Poland. And his parents were shopkeepers, but he had no brothers and sisters, only quite a lot of little cousins.
Were they all Jewish?
They were all Jewish. In fact, they were very religious Jews. They were very Orthodox Jews. And when my father was small, he was very studious and very clever. And he was training to be a rabbi and a scholar, which was what every Jewish family hoped that their son would be, that he'd grow up to be a wise teacher and a rabbi.
When did Camille come to England?
Well, he'd had rather a sad childhood because his father was murdered in front of his eyes when he was only 9 years old by some anti-Semitic thugs who burst into their house on the Sabbath day, and they shot him right in front of his son. And so my father was very sad after that, and he didn't really want to stay in Poland. And after his mother died, he left as soon as he could. So it was about 1932, and he left Poland because he really didn't want to be part of any of that violence anymore.
Why did he come to England before the war?
Well, he came to England for lots of reasons, but the main one was because he found that very religious, very orthodox atmosphere that he'd been brought up in was quite narrow, and he was very clever because all his training had made him read a lot of books, and he wanted to ask questions and read more books and meet other intellectuals, and he found he was quite stifled in that small community, so he left when he did, which was lucky for him because everyone who stayed behind didn't survive.
What happened to our family in Poland?
Well, exactly. What happened to them was that most of them were killed. Most of them were rounded up in the horrible pogroms and Nazi kind of roundups that they did of Jews. They went into ghettos and they were sent to the concentration camps. Now, both his parents, both my father's parents, in other words, my grandparents, had already died before that happened, but all his little cousins were killed, except for, I think, two. One who came, who got out and went to Israel, and another one who got out and went to America. Some children were sent out of Poland. They called that the kinder transport, and even children that had no parents were put on trains and sent to England, where they hoped that they would be looked after by kind people over here. And that's what happened to those two little cousins, which I've been in contact with them. So I know them, and it's lovely to know a couple of those relatives that otherwise I wouldn't ever have got to know.
Which camps did you visit?
A few years ago, I went back to Poland. Well, I went to Poland for the first time because I'd never been to visit my father's birthplace, and I thought I would like to just learn something about where he came from. So I went on a peace retreat. It was called the Bearing Witness Retreat, where I went with some other people who were interested to know what had happened and to try and understand how something so terrible could ever have taken place. And we went to visit Auschwitz, the camp of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the main extermination camp. And that wasn't very far from Krakow, which is fairly near to where my father's birthplace was.
How did it make you feel?
Oh, it's the most dreadful place I've ever been. You can't imagine how awful it is to see those rows and rows and rows of horrible bunks and huts that people had to live in, terrible great holes where they had them for toilets, gas ovens and, gas chambers and places where people died and suffered so horribly. When you go in there and you see it, you just think, I can't believe human beings could ever do this. Piles of human hair, piles of babies' clothes, piles of shoes that were taken off people. You just think, oh my God, how could anyone ever do this to another human being?
What message would you like to pass on to future generations?
Well, the most important thing is that we must try and be alert that these kind of things never happen. You know, they do happen all over the world. There are always wars going on and people being terrible to other people. But we need to develop tolerance and kindness and try and make sure that these awful things don't happen where we persecute other people because we're afraid of them or because we don't understand them. That's what I would like to pass on.
Thank you for your time.
You're most welcome.